From getting sued over his connections to the assault of a minor, to potentially getting thrown out of LIV because of it, here's Greg Norman's lawsuit that has rocked the golf world. The Saudi League CEO is no stranger to controversy. He's the true agent of chaos in golf, and he keeps coming up with things that'd make him stand out as the main character. Sure, he's got a lot of negative media attention too for some of the things he's said, but again, that's what he's always wanted. But in his pursuit of fame and limelight, Greg flew too close to the sun, and now he's attached to a controversy he definitely doesn't want. Because this one isn't about golf or how bold and outspoken he is. This time, Greg's being sued for his connection to an assault at his house. This went down back in September 2021, when Greg permitted his daughter, who's in high school, to host a pool party at their $18 million mansion in Florida. Sounds fairly normal, right? Well, that's what everyone else thought too, but apparently, there was booze at the party. Remember, most of the guests were friends of Norman's daughter, meaning they were all minors. Greg's wife, Kirsten Norman, gave them the alcohol. In fact, bottles were displayed alongside the pool for anyone to drink. And well, from that point, things just kept getting worse. One of the high schoolers got so drunk that she couldn't even walk, with people saying she was stumbling around the party. But then, something truly horrible happened. The girl was pulled to a grassy area near the pool and assaulted by two other guests. So now, her family's suing Norman and his wife because they failed to fulfill their duty to ensure her safety, well-being, and sobriety, and caused injury resulting in pain and suffering. What do the girl's parents want, though? Well, other than outing Norman as someone who enables this stuff at his house, they also want at least $50,000 in damages. Though that second bit may not be much of a problem considering Greg's absolutely loaded with cash. But that's not the only fascinating thing about the lawsuit, because Greg's attorney, Stuart Grossman, says it's a ploy to defame him. First things first, the girl involved in the incident is a friend of Norman's daughter, Kaya, and went to the fancy Oxbridge Academy, which is a private school funded by Bill Koch. And yeah, they charge around $40,000 a year. But the thing is, the case is being filed 2 years after the event, which, according to Norman's lawyer, is ridiculous. Grossman says that the matter was fully investigated and closed back in 2021, and they discovered that the allegations were false back then. He also says they had no idea the lawsuit was being filed, adding that the Normans will now take appropriate action against the lawyers and the parties involved. After all, it's weird for something to come up 2 years later. Though even if the assault allegations were false, that doesn't excuse the booze being handed out at the party. The legal drinking age in Florida is 21, and when the incident happened, the high schoolers would have been 16, which makes Norman and his wife look even worse. Plus, the complaint also mentions how the poor girl's been scarred for life and has to spend a lot of money on counseling and treatment. So the LIVgolf CEO could be in serious trouble here, because the last thing he needed right now was another controversy. Golf's going through some big changes right now. The PGA Tour's made a deal with LIV's investor, the Saudi PIF, to make a global golf entity that combines LIV, the PGA, and the DP World Tour. This is supposed to unite the sport and put an end to this nasty rivalry between LIV and the Tour. But while the organizations have shaken hands and waved the white flag, the people underneath aren't necessarily happy. The PGA Tour golfers, for one, are really made because they feel like they've been betrayed. Norman, on the other hand, is on cloud 9. He's been fighting this war for years now, and he's finally achieved his goal of bringing LIV golf into the mainstream. Besides, a lot of this is about bragging rights too, since he was the one pushing for peace talks between the two entities. But there's a slight problem here. You see, Greg's not actually involved much in this deal, and was only informed about it 10 minutes before the official announcement. Why? Well, because he's burned a lot of bridges over the past year or so, and people on the PGA Tour don't like him. So now, Greg's under a ton of pressure to perform, and this was the last thing he needed. I mean, he's already hated because of his tendency to get into controversies, but people have been enduring it because it's been mostly limited to golf. Now that he's got himself into a much more serious issue, though, things aren't looking great for him. That said, Greg's not someone who gets fazed by this stuff, which is why he's remaining silent on the lawsuit and only focusing on his LIV golf stuff. Sure, you could say that he's trying to divert attention away by only talking about LIV, but it's a strategy that's worked for him in the past too. Seriously, every single time something slightly controversial happens, Greg goes out and says some other insane things so people focus on the newer thing instead. And so, as the news of this case started blowing up, Greg sent out an email to the LIVgolf staff and made some bold claims. The thing is, there's been a ton of debate about whether the league will even continue beyond 2023, because people like Rory McIlroy and the PGA commissioner Jay Monahan think that it's finished. They say that we'll get a new team golf thing that's not LIV, since the league's already done far too much damage to the sport. Greg disagrees, though. He's been raving on and on about how LIV's actually gonna prosper after this deal goes through, and how they're gonna be swimming in cash after attracting new sponsors. Plus, he even tweeted after the announcement talking about how it was a great day in global golf for players and fans. And yeah, his latest emails got a similar vibe. Greg basically said that he's already prepping the league's schedule for 2024, and that it's going to feature some new world-class venues too. Oh, and there was also this whole pep talk in the email about LIV starting from nothing to become this big player in the sport. But the thing is, a mere email might not be enough to distract people from the lawsuit. And now, Greg could face some serious consequences. I mean, even if you take LIV out of the equation, he's still got a lot to contend with. Because if the allegations are proven true, Norman and his wife could face criminal charges. After all, they're the ones at fault for providing the alcohol and turning a blind eye to the horrible incident at their home. Then there's the money angle too, since they'd have to pay legal fees and damages. The hit to Greg's reputation, though, that's something he doesn't want at all, which is exactly why he's scrambling so hard to keep the public eye off this. As for LIVgolf, they could be in trouble too, because even though they've distanced themselves from Greg over the past few months, he's still their CEO and continues to be the face of the company. Seriously, they don't want the negativity right now, especially now that they've finally started to find their footing after the merger's announcement. I mean, even the media isn't criticizing them anymore over their Saudi funding. So even though they haven't issued any official statements about the Australians' lawsuit yet, I'm sure they're thinking about doing something. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if LIVgolf kicks Greg out entirely. That would be a real bombshell because Greg and LIV are two sides of the same coin. They're inseparable, which is part of the reason why the PGA Tour wants to get rid of the league entirely, just so it could start its own team golf thing to replace it. But removing Greg would obviously be the easier solution for the PIF. Why? Well, it's like hitting two birds with one stone. On one hand, getting rid of Greg means that most people who were against LIV would start to accept it again, because most of their issues are with the controversial nature of the CEO and not the league itself. Apparently, that was one of the reasons why Greg wasn't involved in the peace talks as well, since Jay refused to speak to the guy. Besides, LIV's already an established brand, so by kicking Norman out, they won't have to come up with something new and build it up from scratch. And the lawsuit is the perfect cover to pull this off without people getting mad. So there you have it. From potentially getting thrown out of LIVgolf to getting sued over his connections to the assault of a minor, that's all for Greg Norman's lawsuit that has rocked the golf world.